everyone, I'm back. Hey, I had a really good question about embossing, using embossing powder, heat embossing rather than dry embossing. So I thought I'd take some time today and go over that. Just want to give you a heads up. The Stampin' Up! Inks all by themselves are really not made for embossing, but I have a trick for you so that you can make it work. So let's see what we've got. Okay, so here's a couple of cards I've made with embossing. Now this is just with Versamark and the gold embossing powder. Now Stampin' Up! Does sell embossing powders in several colors. They currently have gold, silver, copper, clear, black, and maybe another one in their current catalog. In the new catalog, they will not have copper anymore. So they'll still have gold, silver, and clear, and maybe another color or two. But in the current catalog on page 181, they have several colors embossing powder. And of course, they also sell the Versamark ink, which is typically, well, it's the best thing I know of to use with embossing powder. So this is just using that ornate style stamp. Now I know there's some who don't like to color, and if you don't like to color, to just put it on a card, to just emboss it with embossing powder, heat emboss it, and put it on a card, it's beautiful. It can be lovely. So that is used with just the gold, the Versamark and the gold. But again, while Stampin' Up! Inks aren't really meant for embossing powder, you can make it work. Now this has been embossed. Again, it's hard to see. You can see the little shine on it a little bit when I turn it. But this is also embossed, and it has that lovely texture to where it's, once you've embossed it, how that powder just melts on it and makes a beautiful texture. So let's just see how we would do this. Now for me, because this stamp is kind of large, I do like to go ahead and use my Stamparatus. And I went ahead, like I usually do, is draw myself a little spot here where I want my card to be placed so that my stamp will actually go in the right place. And now not that it matters, since I'm really going to be cutting it out with a stitched rectangle for my card, but at least I know that the stamp will hit it when I put it on here. And again, I did use just a little bit of my adhesive to make it sticky, so I didn't have to worry about using my magnets, but not so much that I couldn't get it off. So the first and most simple way to do is to take your Versamark embossing powder and just very thoroughly ink your stamp. You want really good coverage. Now one of the questions was, does this get old? Well, I have had this since even before Stampin' Up. I don't see a date on it, but I have had this for a long time, like maybe 2010-ish, I'm not sure. So that's somewhere around 10 years I've had this. So I have a refill for it, but I have never used it because I don't do a lot of embossing. Okay, and then I'm just going to close it. And I'm going to make sure I give good solid pressure, because anywhere I don't give good solid pressure and get good coverage, my embossing powder won't stick. So I'm just doing what I always do, just touch it all over, leave it down there for a minute so it can have time to transfer. And this is a really sticky, this Versamark is a really sticky ink, I guess you call it. Now you really can't see it because it is clear, but I'm going to take it off of here. Oh, you might be able to see just a little bit of it but you will see it more in a minute. Let's get this out of the way. And I like to bring in, fold this in half, and you'll see why I folded it in half. Now I'm just going to go ahead and use, I think this, oh, that's silver. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the gold. Now this is the silver, the gold, and the copper that Stampin' Up! Currently has. Remember, the copper will not be available next year, and I just happen to love the copper. So now that I've got that all inked up, I'm just going to spill this all over it. And it's okay, this is not wasted. You'll see, we will save it. And just flick it off. And I may have some stray bits. Flick it off real good. If you think you didn't get it somewhere, give it another hit. Flick it off. And now let's go ahead and save our powder. Now I like to be pretty quick about, once I stamp it down, I like to be pretty quick to get the powder on. Because I don't want, that Versamark will stay wet for a long time, but I want to make sure it's good and wet so my powder will stick to it. So now I'm just going to put that powder away, and I'm going to close it up because I don't want to spill it all over my surface any more than I already have. Because when I start heat embossing it, it's going to melt. So I made a mistake here, and I will tell you how to fix that next time. I've got some stray, and I'll show you how to fix that next time. Okay, so then I need the heat gun, and that's also sold by Stampin' Up, and this is going to make a lot of noise, and it's going to take a little bit of time. So there goes the heat gun. It does need to heat up a little bit, but don't get your fingers too near because it does get hot. And then I want to just lay it down because I don't want my fingers burnt. And I'm just going to start running the heat gun over the image. It takes a little while. And just run it around and around. Don't keep it in one spot too long. And then you will start to see, and this is probably the most fun of heat embossing, is you'll start to see that powder melt. And it's starting to do that. I didn't get really good ink there, but that's okay. So before I go on, turn that off a second. I just want to show you that you can see. You see how much darker this is down here? This part's already melted. This part's still powdery. So I'm just going to finish it. And this is a pretty big image, so it does take just a little time, but you can watch it melt. And that is probably the most satisfying part of heat embossing, is you can just watch the powder melt. And it is just so cool. One of my problems is sometimes I do it too long. And if you do run the heat gun over it too long, you will burn your paper. It can turn brown. So I want to do it just until it's melted, but not longer. So I'm watching it carefully, and I'm seeing all these bits that aren't really going to show up on the camera for you. But when you do it, you will be able to see it. Okay, that's pretty good. Now I can take that, die cut it, put it on a card like this. I just die cut it out with a stitched rectangle, and I popped it up and put it on a card. I had these pieces left over. So that's the really simple way with just the gold embossing powder. Now I'm not sure you can see it, but I should have done another step that I will do this time to prevent these little bits from here from getting out along the edge. So that's just with the plain gold. Now let's do it again and say I want to do it a color. So I'm going to grab another piece of paper. I'll just put it down. And I want to do it in Rococo Rose. Now, the first thing I should have done, and I didn't do before, is Stampin' Up! Does have these little embossing buddies. They have them this year, but they're not going to sell them next year, but never fear. You can get these. This is actually my favorite one. It's an EK Tools. It just puts some powder on here to keep that embossing powder from sticking where there isn't the Versamark ink. Just give it a quick blow off, but that won't keep those little dots. So I want it to be a color. I'm still going to go ahead and ink it up with the Versamark first. I'm going to ink it real good with the Versamark. And if I need to, I can re-ink this just like I've re-inked my other pads. But so far I haven't need to. So in order to make it work with the Stampin' Up! Inks, you ink it up with the Versamark first. And then with your Stampin' Up! Color, whatever color you want. And just pat it on and stamp it down just like before. I'm going to make sure this image is on there good. Of course, I can pick it up and look because this one's a color and I will be able to tell. Now remember, it's okay. You can just leave it sit there for a second while I shut up my ink pads. And just let the ink transfer. Sometimes I do that. Just leave my stamp down. I go into the phone. Okay, so now that I've got pretty good coverage there, so I'm going to pick this up off of here and get this out of the way. Bring in my paper to catch my ink. Now I am going to use a clear because I wouldn't want to put a copper or a silver or a gold over top of this. And this is a clear, and this is really old. This is probably 10 years old too. But I'm just going to pour this on here. This is actually another brand, but I wanted to use it just to show you that it even has some lumps in it. It's so old. But that's the important part. You got to flip the back of it. But you can still see there's still some powder on there. Now, if I doubted that the powder had good coverage, I can always come back and put it on again. And I can see that there's powder covering this. And just for comparison, I'm going to real quickly ink up. Again, I'm not sure this is going to show for you. Real quickly, just ink up and stamp with just the plain ink. And I want you to see that the powder just does not stick to this. If I tried to emboss that, it's very slightly sticking, but it's not sticking enough that it's going to make a nice shiny embossed image. So let's put the powder away. Again, this is really old powder, so I can't think that it does go bad because the heat tool will still activate it and it will still melt. So we'll just do both of these. We'll just sit these here together. Got a little powder. Okay. So this one is without the Versamark, and this one is with the Versamark. I'm not sure. It doesn't really show up here, but I can tell that this has more powder on it. So back to the heat tool. This one under here so I can kind of do them both at the same time. I'm letting my heat tool heat up a little bit, and then I'm going to just start the same thing. And it takes a little bit. Once it starts though, you can see it melting. I can see the lines start to melt and get more shiny, because that's what the clear embossing powder does. Come over here to this one and try to do something, but I don't think it's going to do much. And it's not. And for comparison, just take a quick look at this. You can see this down here is done. This one's cooked enough. The lines are melded together. The embossing powder is melted. Up here, it's still powdery. I haven't done anything to it yet. It hasn't melted. Now this one, which I've put the heat gun over to, I don't see a bit of difference to it. I don't see any embossing because, as I said, the embossing powder just doesn't stick to the Stampin' Up! Ink by itself. But it will stick if you ink it first with the Versamark and then put your color on. So I'm just going to finish this. And it is coming out very nicely. The fun of this is really watching that powder melt. The heat gun's a little bit loud, and it's a lot hot, so make sure you keep your fingers out of the way. Move your finger away from it. Now I'm just going over just to double check, make sure I got all that powder melted, because if I don't have it melted, then it'll just brush off and it will just be ink there. You also have to be careful not to overdo it, or it will turn your paper brown because it'll burn it. It's so hot. I'll go with this a little more, but it doesn't really, not really doing anything. Very, very small bit. Okay. Yeah, there's very, very little there, and where I can really feel the texture here and the raised lines of it. So that is heat embossing with even Stampin' Up! Inks, but you really do need, and Stampin' Up! Does sell the Versamark as well. And they have the heat tool, and they have several colors embossing powders. So, and I didn't really pay much attention. I just wanted to use it somewhere, so I just popped it on top. These are colors I've been working with lately. These are actually scraps from our cards to go. This ribbon is that copper ribbon that is retiring, and I love it, love it, love it, just because of the way you can pull it apart and make it comes, you can see, it comes like that, and then when you pull it apart, I just think it's so pretty. So that's how I'll leave mine. But these were my scraps from our cards to go, which if you would like some cards to go, I still do have some kits to make this, or this. So I still do have some kits for that if you would like to make the cards to go. Or if you'd like to emboss, this is how you do it. So I hope you found that helpful, useful, or even just entertaining. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. And if you have any other questions or anything, just to chat or talk or whatever, give me a call, give me an email or a text or whatever. You all take care. Bye now.